Okay, hope everybody is well. I am going to be doing my final reading from the book Hidden Hand, Exposing How the Chinese Communist Party is Reshaping the World by Clive Hamilton and Mark Oberg. So if you're interested, I have a couple of readings, maybe two or three that I've done from this book. I'm going to be reading from the final chapter entitled Reshaping Global Governance. And again, if you like this material, if you like my content, if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. That really does help. So chapter 13 is entitled Reshaping Global Governance. We'll just get started here. Champion of multilateralism. At the 2018 Central Foreign Affairs Committee, Xi Jinping called on China to, quote, lead the reform of the global governance system. This marked the shift from the careful terminology he had used in the same conference in 2014, where there was no talk of China, quote unquote, leading. The more forthright language reflects Beijing's increasingly robust efforts to reshape international institutions and global regimes to suit the CCP's interests. However, the CCP wants China to be seen as a protector of multilateral institutions, presenting itself as a much-needed counterweight to U.S. unilateralism. In 2018, the United Nations General Assembly Foreign Minister Wang Yi called China a, quote, champion of multilateralism. The following year at the G20 summit in Osaka, Xi Jinping, quote, led a course of safeguarding multilateralism, while a joint EU-China statement in April stressed that both sides, quote, share common ground in upholding multilateralism. The CCP's discontent with the present order should not come as a surprise. After all, it did not have much to say in creating it, joining only in 1970s. But when China's leaders speak of making the international order more inclusive, what they're calling for is an acceptance of authoritarian systems and for their values to be given the same status as democratic ones. The CCP also wants to create new international organizations with norms that stress national sovereignty and thereby impose minimal accountability on China. The party's modus operandi is to strengthen its position in large multinational organizations such as the United Nations and chip away at those of the mechanisms it does not like, while simultaneously creating parallel institutions that China can dominate. Where it can, it will split nations off from multilateral groups and engage in bilateral relationships in which China will almost always be the stronger party. Pseudo-multilateral institutions, discussed below, follow the same approach. Beijing's position at the United Nations has been bolstered by its growing financial contribution at a time when that of the US is declining, and by its large number of allies among developing countries in the non-Western world. Through international bodies, the CCP can set technical standards, gain support for policies like the BRI, insert Xi speak, into discussions, phrases like, quote, community of shared future for mankind, and spread its alternative definitions of, quote, human rights, terrorism, and internet governance. This makes these bodies ideal platforms for increasing the party's global discourse power and for spreading the China model. Next subsection is Synthesizing the United Nations. China is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, and under Xi Jinping has been actively expanding its influence there. It pursues the strategy of, quote, using the countryside to surround the city, challenging the established order by gradually building up bases on the periphery. The most prominent example is China's approach in the UN Human Rights Council, where it has been criticizing Western conceptions and promoting, quote, human rights with Chinese characteristics. Persuading other countries to praise its human rights record. We look at this in detail later this chapter, but meanwhile, there may be other signs of China's surging influence in the UN. The Group of 77, G77, was founded in 1964 to represent the interest of developing nations at the UN. And although China does not consider itself a member of the group, it often works with it. Membership of the G77 has grown substantially since its founding, and today is number 134 countries, nearly 70% of the UN's membership count countries, giving China a substantial pool of allies with which to coordinate activity. Though G77 countries do not always vote as a bloc, China can often mobilize enough of them to speak up on its behalf and to represent its interests in UN bodies. 4 of the UN's 15 specialized agencies, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the International and Telecommunications Organization, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and the UN Industrial Development Organization, are now run by Chinese nationals. By contrast, the US, the UK, and French each had 1. Beijing has also gained effective control of large UN departments neglected by Western nations. One is the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, which is responsible for all kinds of activities, from the Sustainable Development Goals to the following up on actions mandated by UN conferences and summits. It is headed by Li Jinmen, previously China's Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, who also advises the UN Secretary General on internet governance. A European diplomat has described the department as a, quote, Chinese enterprise. Everybody knows it and everybody accepts it. The Department of Economic and Social Affairs has worked closely with Chinese organizations to push the BRI onto the UN's agenda. Its Economic and Policy Division is implementing a major project linking the BRI to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, part of its high-profile agenda for sustainable development. A Dutch think tank has written of China's employing the UN to, quote, internationalize and legitimize its own domestic interests. A slew of UN agencies, including the World Meteorological Organization, the International Labor Organization, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and the International Telecommunication Union, have signed BRI agreements, all feeding into the CCP's narrative that the BRI is a global initiative rather than a Chinese one. The UN Development Program was the first at the UN to sign a BRI memorandum of understanding with China in September 2016. Helen Clark, former New Zealand Prime Minister and the administrator of the UNDP, lauded the BRI as a powerful platform for economic growth and an important catalyst and accelerator for the Sustainable Development Goals. The memorandum was followed up May 2017 by an action plan for cooperation between the UNDP and the Chinese government. The UNDP stressed that it, quote, commends the government of China for enacting this initiative and acknowledges the role of China in leading by example and reaffirms its desire to support China in its efforts. Even UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has praised the BRI in opening remarks at the 2019 Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation held in Beijing. He was accompanied on his trip by his Undersecretary Liu Jinmen. Guterres commended China, quote, for its central role as a pillar of international cooperation and multilateralism. China has also been wielding influence at the Economic and Social Council, one of the UN's main 6 bodies. It's been a member since 1971. Through its membership of the Council's NGO accrediting committee, Beijing has blocked organizations it deems unfriendly. It prevented the committee to protect journalists from being accredited as an NGO for 4 years. The situation was only resolved when the United States called for a full vote. China also tried to have the consultative status of the Germany-based Society for Threatened Peoples withdrawn. By contrast, CCP front groups like the China Foundation for Peace and Development were approved without delay. Beijing has also regularly used the accreditation process to demand that NGOs remove material it does not like from their websites and to inform that they must refer to Taiwan as Taiwan Province of China. Such orders are put even to NGOs that have nothing to do with China. One NGO told Human Rights Watch that China complained about material concerning dissident Nobel laureate Liu Xiaobo on its website. The NGO removed some of the, quote, offensive material, but continued to see its application deferred by China when it did not comply with requests for information that would have put sources in China at risk. In 2015, at UN headquarters, And both New York and Geneva began to refuse entry to Taiwanese nationals and even Taiwanese diplomats if they were carrying only their Taiwanese passports. Whether this was done at Beijing's request or was a preemptive act, it indicates that China's efforts to erase Taiwan as a de facto independent nation are succeeding. The UN explained it only accepts documents issued by member states. Taiwan hasn't been a member of the UN since it was replaced by the PRC in 1971. Its bids to join have been rejected several times. Documents issued by Taiwan have often been accepted in practice, but refusal of Taiwan issued identifications seems to be on the rise. In 2017, a group of Taiwanese students were denied entry into Geneva headquarters to observe a session of the UN Human Rights Council. They were told that to be able to enter, they needed to show, quote, Taiwan compatriot travel documents, a type of permit issued by Chinese authorities to Taiwanese citizens wanting to travel to China. And in 2018, a Taiwanese journalist was refused entry even after presenting this permit. She was told she needed a PRC passport to enter. Others have been ejected from UN premises under direct orders from Chinese members. Former UN Undersecretary General Wu Hongbo admitted on Chinese national television that he had used his position to have the head of the World Uyghur Congress, Dolkun Issa, removed from UN premises during a forum on indigenous issues in April 2017, despite the fact that Dolkun was accredited as an NGO participant. Dolkun was given no reason for his expulsion and was not allowed to re-enter the premises. Next section is entitled Pushing Taiwan Off the International Stage. Beijing has successfully pressured Western companies to treat Taiwan, a country of 23 million, as if it were part of the PRC. Over the course of 2019, it aggressively courted those countries that still recognize Taiwan, leading some to switch recognition within a very short period. For a long time, China has resisted the inclusion of Taiwan in the World Health Organization, thereby impeding the global fight against diseases. During the 2003 Sars epidemic, Taiwanese health organizations only received information about the dangerous disease through contacts at the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention. After SARS broke out in a Taiwanese hospital, the WHO finally dispatched some experts to Taiwan, the first time in 31 years. Following this debacle, Taiwan was occasionally allowed to participate in the WHO with China's permission. During the rapid spread of the novel coronavirus in the early 2020s, at Beijing's insistence, WHO excluded Taiwan from meetings of countries affected by the outbreak. China's foreign ministry claimed that China would tell Taiwan what it needed to know about the epidemic. Taiwan's foreign minister said that China was not passing on all information, impeding its ability to protect its citizens. At the same time, Nikkei Asian Review reported a diplomatic source in Beijing noted that, quote, China and the WHO have extremely close ties. China is the world's second largest financial contributor to the UN. Previously, Nature reported that the WHO's relationship with China grew especially close during the tenure of Margaret Chan, who led the organization from 2006 to 2017. Chan was rumored to be in the running for the position of Hong Kong chief executive, but Beijing chose Carrie Lam instead. During the coronavirus crisis, WHO's Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus was criticized for backing Beijing's initial resistance to travel warnings and giving high praise to President Xi's response. Xi's wife, Peng Liyun, is a longtime WHO Goodwill Ambassador. After Tsai Ing-wen was elected president of Taiwan in 2016, Beijing began blocking the country's participation in the World Health Assembly, presumably to punish it for electing a politician the CCP dislikes. The WHA in Geneva has refused to accredit Taiwanese journalists trying to cover it for several years in a row. Canadian journalist Yuli Hu was prevented from covering the assembly of the UN International Civil Aviation Organization in Montreal in 2016 because she was working for Taiwan's central news agency. Taiwan's Red Cross Society has not only been excluded from the WHO, it is not recognized by the International Committee of the Red Cross, which has been trying hard to ingratiate itself with Beijing. In March 2019, the committee signed an agreement with the Chinese Chamber of Commerce to, quote, pool and share their resources to support Chinese companies operating in complex environments abroad. The committee's special envoy to China, Jacques Pellet, praised China's contributions to humanitarian relief on China's international TV broadcaster CGTN. In Xinjiang, where over 1 million ethnic minorities have disappeared into concentration camps, the International Committee has worked with China's Red Cross Society on a development project. While the outcome may be beneficial to some, the presence of the international organization lends legitimacy to policies that are, in effect, cultural genocide and crimes against humanity in the region. Beijing's implacable campaign against Taiwan sends an unambiguous message to the world that Taiwan belongs to China. It is intended to intimidate Taiwan, showing the cost of refusing to follow the CCP's wishes. It is also meant to erode international resistance to Beijing's plan to incorporate Taiwan into PRC, possibly by launching an armed attack, something that the hawks inside the CCP have long wanted to do. Next section is Policing Goes Global. Around the world, the United Front Work Department has sponsored or encouraged the creation of overseas Chinese service centers, known in some places as Chinese community and police cooperation centers. Set up to protect overseas Chinese, whatever their citizenship, and to bring them together to, quote, share in the dream of national rejuvenation. They are also a means of keeping watch on the activities of dissidents and critics. With the support of Chinese embassies, some 60 centers operate in 40 countries, including the United States, Canada, France, and Britain. And these have, according to a report from the official China news agency, quote, gradually penetrated into overseas Chinese communities. The centers work with local police, offering liaison and translation services, among other things, but they also spread the message that the CCP is everywhere. In Melbourne, for example, on the message that on the 70th anniversary of the PRC, police in a district with a high ethnic Chinese population raised the Chinese flag over the station. The action was widely criticized, with one radio commentator saying, quote, it's a police station honoring a police state. Local Taiwanese Uyghurs, and Tibetans also objected. China has been expanding its cooperation with international organizations engaged in crime control. In April 2015 alone, Chinese authorities asked Interpol to post 500 red notices, requests for law enforcement agencies around the world to arrest those accused of crimes. The number was the same as the total for the prior 30 years combined. Beijing is known to issue red notices for political dissidents. In 2016, Meng Hongwei became the first Chinese president of Interpol. And in 2017, Europol, the EU's police cooperation agency, signed a strategic agreement with China's Ministry of Public Security, representing the Meng Hongwei, who was then still Vice Minister of Public Security. Since then, Europol, which facilitates cross-border operations against criminals, has received Chinese representatives of the MPS to discuss closer cooperation. These developments have had noticeable effects. When in 2017, Italian police detained Dolkun Isa, president of the Munich-based World Uyghur Congress, and a German citizen, they reportedly did so following a request from China, which had issued a red notice for Dolkun's arrest back in 2006. According to a Western diplomat, the Chinese government regularly requests European states to arrest Dolkun. Interpol revoked his red notice in February 2018, and six weeks later, the party committee at China's Public Security Bureau expelled Meng Hongwei. On a visit to Beijing a few months later, Meng simply disappeared, leaving Interpol mystified. It's unclear whether his disappearance was related to the red notice or some other infraction, but Bethany Allen Abraham wrote that the CCP disciplinary authorities, quote, were treating Meng first and foremost as a party member who had strayed from the straight and narrow, rather than a leader of an international law enforcement agency. In January 2020, after a one-day trial, he was convicted of bribery and sent to prison for 13 and a half years. Extradition treaties are another way for the Chinese state to extend its long arm. The people of Hong Kong understand all too well what it means to be extradited to China, which is why they protested so vehemently in 2019 against a proposed extradition bill. The Beijing-friendly government was forced to abandon it. By contrast, 7 EU countries have signed and ratified extradition treaties with China: France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Romania, Bulgaria, and Lithuania. Spain was the first Western country to sign such a treaty, which it ratified in 2007. In December 2016, a joint Spanish-Chinese operation resulted in the arrest of 269 people accused of running telecommunications fraud ring from Spain. Most of them were Taiwanese nationals, but because Spain does not formally recognize Taiwan, they were treated as Chinese nationals by Spain's courts. As of July 2019, Spain had extradited 218 of the arrested Taiwanese citizens to China, where they will not face a fair trial. Kenya, Malaysia, and Vietnam have also extradited Taiwanese citizens to China. Italy ratified an extradition treaty with China in 2015. In addition, a 2016 police cooperation agreement sees Chinese officers patrolling popular tourist spots in Rome, Venice, and Prato. Prato, near Florence, has a large ethnic Chinese population, many of whom work in textile and clothing factories. Although the ostensible purpose of the joint patrols is to protect Chinese tourists, the presence of Chinese police abroad is another means of sending the message to overseas Chinese that the state goes wherever they go. But for Beijing, the primary benefit of these police cooperation agreements is their role in helping tie foreign law enforcement into a network of obligations, information sharing, and possibly looking the other way when Beijing acts unlawfully. France ratified an extradition treaty with China in 2015, and in September of the following year, Chinese national Chen Wenhao became the first person to be extradited under it. Under the terms of the treaty, French nationals are protected from extradition to China, but citizens of other European nations have no such protection. After France granted asylum to Grace Meng, the wife of Interpol President Meng Hongwei, China suspended all police cooperation with France. Despite the extradition treaty, Chinese authorities have kidnapped suspects in France. Unwilling to wait and go through the extradition process, Chinese authorities, quote, repatriated Zhang Ning in February 2017 without informing French authorities. A red notice had been issued for Zhang, who was accused of economic crimes, but undercover agents persuaded him to return to China as part of Xi's notorious Operation Fox Hunt, the global extension of his anti-corruption campaign. In fact, far more Chinese fugitives are, quote unquote, persuaded to return to China than are extradited or deported. This persuasion often involves threats to punish families in China and to broadcast the photos and alleged crimes of the accused across the nation. Such was the case for Melbourne grandmother Zhu Shiqin, accused of graft of the party, who returned to China after her photo was plastered across state media and her sister's assets were frozen. This kind of extrajudicial intimidation is not uncommon, and to date has been met with little resistance from Western countries when Chinese officials harass and threaten dissidents and ethnic minorities. China's security services have tried to intimidate Uyghurs living in Belgium, France, Germany, Canada, and many other countries. In October 2017, the U.S. State Department blocked the FBI from arresting 4 MSS officials who have entered the U.S. on false pretenses and tried to, quote, persuade wealthy dissident Gu Wengai, also known as Miles Kwok, to return to China. When Xi Jinping went to London in 2015, police arrested Chinese and Tibetan dissidents protesting his visit and searched their homes. A year earlier, when Xi visited Brussels, demonstrations were forbidden and pro-Tibet protesters were arrested. The pattern was repeated in Switzerland in 2017. Western governments are in this way allowing their police forces to assist the CCP in suppressing dissent. Tiananmen survivor Xiao Jiang, whose London home was one of those searched, compared it to his experience in China. Quote, every time I was arrested, the Chinese police would search my rooms and take things. It reminded me of that. But a growing number of countries are declining to cooperate with the Chinese authorities. In 2017, the Australian Parliament stopped the move by the government to push through an extradition treaty with China, with members citing the corruption of China's judicial system. the fact that China's courts have a conviction rate of more than 99%, and the widespread violation of human rights. In 2019, Chinese authorities celebrated Sweden's decision to extradite former Chinese official Qiao Jinjun. Sweden has no treaty with China, and the decision was based on the UN Convention Against Corruption. But a Swedish court blocked the extradition because of the, quote, real risk that the person will be subjected to persecution for political reasons in China, citing torture, degrading punishment, and executions. In recent times, Sweden has shown itself less easily cowed than others by Beijing's bullying. Perhaps it was this that led China's ambassador to Stockholm to comment, quote, "We treat our friends with good wine, but for our enemies, we go get shotguns." I'm going to skip a bit here to the last page, so I'm kind of out of time. So the last subsection is exporting, quote, internet sovereignty and standards for new technologies. The CCP's concept of, quote unquote, internet sovereignty replaces the idea of an open, borderless internet that promotes the free flow of information. Domestically, it involves a censorship regime unparalleled in history, manipulation of search engines to block specific terms, an army of online censors, and tight regulation of internet companies. When Chinese government think tanks call for a, quote, democratic global internet governance system, this is simply another way of calling for internet sovereignty by making the norms of autocratic countries equal in status to those of democratic countries, allowing each country to censor the internet within its borders as it pleases. Since 2014, China has organized the annual World Internet Conference in Wuzhen. Far from being a fringe event, the conference attracts high-profile participants such as Apple's Tim Cook and Google's CEO Sundar Pichai, both of whom have delivered public addresses. Cook said he was proud to, quote, help build a community that will join a common future in cyberspace. The Chinese translation sounded very close to Xi's shared future for mankind. To spread internet sovereignty globally, Beijing trains officials from other countries. In November 2017, China hosted a, quote, seminar on cyberspace management for officials of countries along the Belt and Road Initiative, giving a session on how to monitor negative public opinion and then spin it to a positive direction. While the party is unlikely to win over the entire world to its ideas of internet governance, it has celebrated some successes. Vietnam's highly restrictive cyberspace law is modeled on China's. Russia has backed the idea of internet sovereignty with a 2019 law giving the government sweeping powers over what people can see on the internet inside Russia's borders. Perhaps more importantly, China is exporting not just the concepts and expertise, but the technology that enables the CCP's censorship and surveillance regime. The, quote, safe sites that are being built around the world use the surveillance technology of companies like Huawei. Huawei provided the, quote, safe city infrastructure for Lusca, where its employees have also reportedly helped the Zambian government track political opponents. Finally, China has paid close attention to the role of international standard setting, that is, setting the requirements, norms, and technical specifications for products or tasks. In 2015, it created a leading small group for standardization along the Belt and Road. It has also secured leadership positions in the International Organization for Standardization, the International Electric Commission, and the UN's International Telecommunication Union, among others. Through the latter body, Chinese companies, including ZTE and the state-owned China Telecom, have proposed new facial recognition standards, according to leaked documents first reported by the Financial Times. Being able to set global standards based on their own proprietary technologies gives companies a distinct advantage in expanding their market share. In June 2019, ZTE and China Telecom proposed a standard to add video monitoring to smart streetlights, precisely what protesters in Hong Kong have been concerned about. The standard was accepted. That's the end of the chapter here. So if you're still with me, thanks for listening.